In 1890, a French artist named Villemard sat down to imagine what life would look like in the year 2000. He painted families eating meals prepared by machines, students learning through books connected directly to their brains, and barbers using bizarre contraptions to style hair automatically. He wasn't alone. The late 19th century was gripped by future fever. Newspapers ran regular columns predicting life 100 years ahead. Engineers published detailed technical drawings of inventions that didn't exist yet. Novelists like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells wrote stories that readers treated less like fiction and more like instruction manuals for the coming century. Everyone, it seemed, had an opinion about what the future would bring, and most of those opinions turned out to be spectacularly wrong in the most fascinating ways possible. Picture yourself standing on a street corner in 1890. Horse-drawn carriages clatter past, steam engines hiss in the distance, and the air smells of coal smoke and manure. Now imagine what people on that very corner thought your life would look like today in 2026. They didn't just guess at minor improvements. They imagined a world so fantastically different that it makes our actual reality seem almost boring by comparison. The Victorians were absolutely convinced that by now every single person would own their own flying machine. Not airplanes as we know them, mind you, but personal contraptions strapped directly to your back. They envisioned elaborate wings made of silk and aluminum, powered by compact steam engines or revolutionary electric batteries. In their minds, the morning commute of 2026 would involve thousands of people launching themselves into the air from their doorsteps, soaring over buildings like flocks of mechanical birds. The fascinating thing is how seriously they took this idea. It wasn't science fiction to them. It was simply the logical next step. After all, they'd seen bicycles transform from curiosities into everyday transportation in just a few decades. They'd watched trains shrink the continent and steamships conquer the oceans. Flying seemed like the obvious frontier, and they assumed technology would make it as simple and accessible as riding a bicycle. They imagined aerial traffic lanes crisscrossing cities at different altitudes, with policemen on flying platforms directing the flow. They pictured delivery boys with mechanical wings dropping packages on rooftops, and businessmen adjusting their wing-mounted engines while soaring to lunch appointments. The sky would be as crowded as the streets below, perhaps even more so. Some dreamers went further, imagining that buildings would need to be redesigned entirely, with landing platforms instead of front doors, and that ground-level streets might eventually become obsolete altogether, used only for freight and those too timid to take to the air. This obsession with personal flight connected directly to another grand vision, one that would transform not just how people traveled, but how they lived every single day. The late 1800s had just begun to glimpse the power of electricity, and that glimpse was enough to send imaginations into overdrive. If electric lights could banish darkness, what else might this mysterious force accomplish? The home of 2026, as imagined in 1890, was a palace of electrical servants. Mechanical arms would emerge from kitchen walls to prepare breakfast while you slept. You'd wake to find eggs perfectly cooked by automatic timing devices, toast browned to exact specifications, and coffee brewed without human intervention. A mechanical butler, powered by electric motors and operated by an elaborate system of switches, would lay out your clothes and help you dress. But it went far beyond mere convenience. Victorian futurists believed electricity would make physical labor completely obsolete within the home. Floors would clean themselves using some sort of electrical vibration that repelled dirt. Dishes would wash themselves in electrified water that dissolved food particles instantly. Even beds would make themselves, with sheets pulled tight by hidden electric mechanisms built into the bed frame. The remarkable thing about these predictions wasn't just their optimism, but their specificity. Magazine articles and exhibitions featured detailed drawings of these electric homes, complete with explanations of how each device would function. They weren't vague about it. They genuinely believed they were previewing the real future, not spinning fantasies. Some inventors even built primitive prototypes, clunky devices that barely worked but seemed to prove the concept was sound. What they couldn't imagine, interestingly enough, was that we'd still be doing these tasks ourselves, just with slightly better tools. The idea that someone in 2026 would still manually crack eggs into a pan or pull sheets tight with their own hands would have seemed like a failure of imagination to them, a depressing lack of progress. The confidence of the Victorian age knew few bounds, and nowhere was this more apparent than in their certainty that humanity would soon dominate nature itself. If human ingenuity could harness electricity and build machines that moved faster than horses, surely it could master something as simple as weather. By 2026, they believed, rain would fall only when and where we wanted it. Enormous machines, perhaps electrical in nature, would be positioned across the landscape, capable of pulling moisture from the air and creating clouds on demand. Farmers would place orders for rain the way you might order goods from a catalog. 3 inches on Tuesday for the wheat fields, please, and make sure it's finished by noon. But it went much further than agriculture. They imagined cities protected by invisible electrical fields that would deflect storms around them, keeping the streets perpetually dry and pleasant. Hurricanes would be broken apart by strategic electrical discharges before they could reach land. Lightning would be captured and stored in massive batteries, both eliminating a danger and providing free power. Some visionaries proposed even more ambitious schemes. Why endure winter at all? Giant heaters, possibly powered by volcanic energy or advanced electrical systems, would warm entire regions. The northern territories would become as temperate as the south. Canada might have palm trees. Snow would become a curiosity, something you'd have to visit special preserves to see, like rare animals in a zoo. The logic seemed airtight to them. After all, they'd already seen humanity reshape rivers, flatten mountains for railways, and illuminate the night. Weather was just another natural force waiting to be conquered. The idea that we'd still be at the mercy of storms and droughts more than a century later would have struck them as ridiculous, a sign that something had gone terribly wrong with progress. They couldn't conceive that nature might be more complex and powerful than human cleverness, or that attempting to control it might have consequences we couldn't foresee. The Victorian imagination didn't stop at conquering the sky and the weather. They looked at the vast, unexplored oceans and saw another frontier waiting to be settled. Just as the American West was being tamed with railways and towns, the ocean floor would soon be home to glittering underwater cities. These weren't crude submarines or temporary research stations in their vision. They imagined permanent settlements with thousands of residents, living in enormous glass domes that allowed sunlight to filter through. Streets made of polished metal would wind between buildings constructed from materials that could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep sea. Children would grow up watching whales swim past their bedroom windows, as comfortable underwater as you are in your home right now. Transportation between underwater cities would be handled by sleek vessels that moved through tubes, similar to the pneumatic tube systems that were just beginning to appear in office buildings. You could travel from an underwater city off the coast of New York to one near London, moving through a sealed tunnel that crossed the Atlantic floor, completing the journey in a matter of hours. But these cities weren't just for living. The ocean floor would become farmland. Vast fields of kelp and other sea vegetation would be cultivated, providing food for both the underwater cities and the surface world above. They envisioned farmers in specialized suits herding schools of fish the way ranchers herded cattle, breeding and raising them in fenced areas of the ocean. Minerals would be mined from the sea floor, and precious metals extracted from the water itself. Some dreamers went even further, suggesting that eventually more people would live underwater than on land. The surface would become almost quaint, a place you might visit for vacation, but not where serious people conducted their lives. The future belonged to those brave enough to claim the 3/4 of the planet covered by water. Standing in 1890, this seemed perfectly logical. After all, just decades earlier, most people had never traveled more than a few miles from their birthplace. Now, trains crossed continents and ships crossed oceans. Underwater cities were simply the next obvious step. While some Victorians dreamed of underwater cities, others focused on a different kind of connection. The telephone had only recently been invented and it was already transforming society, but they knew it was just the beginning. Why settle for hearing someone's voice when you could see them as well? By 2026, they predicted, every home would have a telephone vision box. You'd stand in front of a screen, perhaps mounted on the wall of your parlor, and see the person you were talking to as clearly as if they were in the room with you. Distance would become meaningless. You could have dinner with a friend in Paris while sitting in your New York dining room, watching them eat and talk as if you were at the same table. But the vision boxes wouldn't just connect individuals. They'd bring entertainment directly into your home in ways that seemed almost magical. Opera houses and theaters would install these devices, broadcasting performances to thousands of homes simultaneously. The greatest actors and singers would perform not just for a few hundred people in an auditorium, but for millions watching from their parlors across the country, perhaps across the world. Imagine never having to leave home for entertainment. The best shows, the finest music, the most important lectures, all available at the turn of a dial. Some futurists predicted this would lead to the end of concert halls and theaters entirely. Why maintain expensive buildings when everyone could enjoy performances from the comfort of home? They also foresaw that these vision boxes would revolutionize education. A teacher in Boston could instruct students in California, all of them seeing diagrams and demonstrations in real time. Libraries would become obsolete because you could simply request to see any book, and it would appear on your screen page by page. Knowledge would be instantly accessible to anyone, anywhere. The transformation of how people ate seemed inevitable to Victorian futurists, and it tied directly into their vision of an electrified, mechanized world. Why waste time growing crops and raising animals when science could simply create food directly? By 2026, they believed natural agriculture would be seen as hopelessly primitive. Instead, factories would produce food from basic chemicals, assembling nutrients into whatever form you desired. You might swallow a small pill for breakfast that contained everything your body needed for the entire day. Or perhaps you'd prefer a powder that you'd mix with water, creating a substance that looked and tasted exactly like steak, but was actually synthesized from coal and minerals. This wasn't a dystopian vision to them. It was liberation. Think of all the land currently wasted on farms that could be returned to forests or turned into parks. Think of all the labor freed up when you didn't need millions of people planting, harvesting, and processing food. Humanity could focus on higher pursuits, on art and science and exploration, while machines handled the tedious business of nutrition. Some predictions were remarkably specific. One popular magazine article described a typical dinner in 2026, where the host would offer guests a menu of flavors, all created from the same basic chemical paste. Would you like your paste to taste like roast duck or perhaps lobster? Both were just different combinations of the same underlying substances. The science was there, they insisted. It just needed time to be perfected and scaled up. They even predicted this would solve world hunger. If food could be created from simple, abundant chemicals, then no one would ever starve again. Famines would become impossible. The developing world would leap forward, no longer held back by poor soil or unfavorable climates. Every nation could be self-sufficient in food production because geography would no longer matter. A factory in the desert could produce as much food as the most fertile farmland, perhaps even more efficiently. The railway had transformed the 19th century, shrinking vast distances and connecting isolated communities. To Victorians, it seemed obvious that this revolution had only just begun. If trains could cross continents, why not oceans? The most ambitious dreamers proposed massive tunnels running along the ocean floor, connecting New York to London, San Francisco to Tokyo. These wouldn't be crude bore holes, but magnificent passageways wide enough for multiple tracks, with trains racing through them at unprecedented speeds. The journey from America to Europe would take not weeks by ship, but hours by train. They'd worked out the engineering in surprising detail, at least in their minds. The tunnels would be built in sections, each manufactured on the surface and then sunk into position on the ocean floor. Special materials would resist the crushing pressure of the water above. Pumping stations would remove any moisture that seeped in. The trains themselves would be marvels, sealed against pressure changes, traveling at speeds that would make contemporary trains seem like they were standing still. But the vision extended beyond just ocean crossings. They imagined a truly global rail network with tracks running through every continent, all connected. You could board a train in Cape Town and step off in Stockholm without ever leaving the rails. The train would simply switch from one line to another, adjusting to different gauges automatically, perhaps even changing its wheels while in motion. Some futurists proposed elevated railways that would soar above cities on massive pylons, creating a second level of urban transportation. Others suggested underground networks that would burrow beneath city streets, creating vast subterranean transit systems. Both ideas seemed equally feasible and equally certain to happen. The social implications fascinated them almost as much as the engineering. When you could travel anywhere in the world in a day or less, wouldn't national boundaries start to seem arbitrary? Wouldn't languages blend together and cultures merge? They predicted that by 2026, the world would be essentially one vast interconnected society, unified by the railways that bound it together. The idea that we'd still identify primarily with individual nations would have struck them as hopelessly backward. Medicine in 1890 was primitive by our standards, but it had made enough progress that people could see a trajectory. Germ theory was gaining acceptance. Antiseptic surgery was saving lives. It seemed like humanity was on the verge of understanding and conquering the biological world, just as it was conquering the physical world with machines. By 2026, they predicted with remarkable confidence, disease would be extinct, not just controlled or managed, but completely eliminated. Doctors would understand the body so thoroughly that illness would be impossible. You'd take preventive treatments that would make you immune to every known ailment. If something new appeared, science would create a cure within days, perhaps hours. But it went further than just preventing disease. They believed aging itself would be conquered, not through mystical potions, but through scientific understanding of what made bodies deteriorate. By 2026, they imagined, doctors would offer treatments that would keep you perpetually young. Perhaps you'd undergo a procedure every decade or so that would reset your body to its prime condition. Or maybe you'd take a daily medicine that prevented cells from aging at all. Living to 150 years old would be common, they thought. Perhaps living to 200 wouldn't be unusual. Some optimists suggested that the generation born around the year 2000 might effectively live forever, with science continually advancing faster than they aged. Death would become optional, something you'd choose when you'd finally had enough of life, not something imposed on you by biology. They imagined what this would mean for society. Knowledge wouldn't be lost when experts died. Mozart could still be composing new music. Shakespeare could have written 50 more plays. The greatest minds of any generation could continue contributing for centuries. Human progress would accelerate exponentially because wisdom would accumulate rather than constantly needing to be rediscovered by each new generation. The late 19th century was marked by rapid advances in weapons technology, and this sparked both fear and strange optimism. Many Victorian futurists believed that weapons would become so terrible, so devastatingly powerful, that war would become impossible. By 2026, they imagined, armies would consist entirely of machines, mechanical soldiers that never tired, never felt fear, never questioned orders. These automatons would be so efficient at destruction that any conflict between nations would be over in minutes, perhaps seconds. The side with better machines would win instantly, with such overwhelming force that surrender would be the only rational choice. But here's where their thinking took an unexpected turn. Many believed this would actually lead to permanent peace. If war meant instant, total destruction, no nation would dare start one. The weapons would be so terrible that they'd never be used. Countries would maintain these mechanical armies purely for deterrence, like chess pieces that never moved. The mere existence of such power would be enough to prevent conflict. They envisioned automated fortresses that could defend themselves against any attack, making invasion impossible. Flying machines that could drop explosives with perfect precision, making sneak attacks futile. Even weapons that could project deadly forces across vast distances without any projectile at all, perhaps using electrical energy or some other invisible means. Some dreamers speculated about weapons that could affect human minds directly, making soldiers unable to fight or feel aggressive. The irony of achieving peace through overwhelming capacity for violence didn't seem to trouble them. In fact, they saw it as the only logical path forward. Humanity couldn't uninvent weapons, couldn't go backward to a simpler time. The only choice was to move forward until weapons became so powerful that using them would be unthinkable. They genuinely believed that by 2026, war would be a distant memory, something people read about in history books with the same horror we might feel reading about ancient Roman gladiatorial games. Electricity could carry sound through telephone wires. It could carry light to illuminate homes. So why couldn't it carry thoughts? This question captivated Victorian futurists, who saw telepathy not as mystical nonsense, but as an inevitable application of advancing technology. By 2026, they predicted, devices would exist that could detect and interpret the electrical impulses in your brain. You'd wear a crown or helmet fitted with sensors, and your thoughts would be transmitted to a similar device worn by someone else, anywhere in the world. Speaking would become optional, perhaps even obsolete. People would communicate mind to mind with perfect clarity and no possibility of misunderstanding. The advantages seemed obvious. Language barriers would disappear. You could share your exact thoughts with someone who spoke a completely different language, and they'd understand perfectly because they'd be experiencing your actual thoughts, not a translation. Lies would become impossible because you couldn't hide your true thoughts from the machine. Society would be transformed by this enforced honesty. They imagined courtrooms where the accused wore thought-reading devices, making guilt or innocence immediately apparent. Business negotiations where both parties could verify that the other was negotiating in good faith. Marriages where couples could truly understand each other's feelings and desires without the confusion of words. Some futurists even proposed that these devices would end all conflict, because how could you hate someone whose thoughts you could experience directly? But the vision extended beyond simple communication. They believed these machines would allow thoughts to be recorded and stored, like photographs of the mind. A dying person could record their memories and experiences, preserving them for future generations. A teacher could record a lecture directly from their mind. Students could absorb it in minutes rather than hours. Genius could be copied and distributed. If Newton or Galileo had possessed such technology, they thought, imagine how much further advanced we'd be now. One prediction that Victorian futurists made with absolute certainty was that machines would soon eliminate most human labor. They'd seen machines replace manual work in factories and on farms. It seemed obvious that this trend would continue until almost no one needed to work at all. By 2026, they believed, the average person would work perhaps 4 hours a day, maybe 24 hours a week at most. And this work wouldn't be physical labor, but rather supervising machines, making decisions, engaging in creative and intellectual tasks. The rest of your time would be yours to spend however you wished. This wasn't a cause for concern in their minds. It was the ultimate goal of progress. Humanity would finally be free to pursue higher callings. Everyone would have time to develop their artistic talents, to study subjects that interested them, to engage in sports and recreation. Society would transform from one focused on production to one focused on culture and refinement. They imagined cities filled with parks and museums, theaters and libraries, all crowded with people who finally had time to enjoy them. Education would be lifelong because you'd have the time to learn anything that caught your interest. Physical fitness would improve because everyone would have hours each day for exercise. The arts would flourish as thousands of people who might have been farmers or factory workers would instead become painters, musicians, and writers. Some thinkers went further, suggesting that the concept of employment itself would disappear. Why would anyone need to pay you for work when machines did everything? Instead, the wealth generated by the machines would be distributed to everyone. You'd receive whatever you needed to live comfortably, free to spend your days however you pleased. The economic systems of the past would seem as primitive as feudalism seemed to them. Climate control was a recurring obsession for Victorian futurists, and while some imagined controlling the weather itself, others took a more personal approach. By 2026, they believed, no one would ever be too hot or too cold because everyone would wear specialized clothing that maintained perfect comfort. These suits would be powered by small batteries or perhaps even miniature engines. Tiny tubes woven through the fabric would circulate heated or cooled air depending on what you needed. You could walk through a blizzard in comfort or cross a desert without breaking a sweat. The temperature would adjust automatically to your preferences and the environment. But they imagined these suits doing much more than just controlling temperature. They'd filter the air you breathed, removing dust and pollutants. In cities where coal smoke filled the air, this seemed especially valuable. They'd even protect you from disease by filtering out harmful germs before you could inhale them. Some versions of this prediction included face coverings with special materials that would allow you to breathe freely while blocking anything dangerous. The social implications fascinated them. If everyone could control their personal environment, architecture would change dramatically. Buildings wouldn't need elaborate heating or cooling systems. You could construct homes with large, open windows that let in natural light and air, because maintaining comfort would be the individual's responsibility, not the building's. Northern regions would become as habitable as southern ones because the weather outside wouldn't matter. They even predicted that these suits would eliminate the need for different seasonal clothing. You'd wear essentially the same outfit year-round, adjusting the temperature settings as needed. Wardrobes would shrink. Fashion would focus entirely on style rather than practicality. The heavy coats and multiple layers that characterized Victorian dress would seem absurd to people in 2026, like primitive attempts to solve a problem that technology had made irrelevant. Victorian cities were crowded, dirty, and increasingly difficult to navigate as populations swelled. The futurists of 1890 looked at this problem and imagined a solution that seemed both practical and inevitable: cities where you never had to walk at all. They envisioned moving sidewalks running along every major street, operating at different speeds. The slowest lane would move just fast enough for you to step onto safely from the stationary edge. Then you'd walk across to progressively faster lanes, each one moving quicker than the last. The fastest lane in the center might travel at 10 or 15 miles per hour, getting you across the city in minutes without any effort. These wouldn't be crude conveyor belts. They'd be sophisticated systems with weather protection, perhaps covered by elegant glass canopies. Seating would be available for those who wanted to rest during their journey. Vendors might operate small shops on the slower-moving sections, selling newspapers and refreshments to passengers. The moving sidewalks would never stop, operating day and night, a constant river of motion through the urban landscape. They predicted that this would transform city design completely. Buildings would be constructed with entrances that opened directly onto the moving sidewalks. The stationary ground would become almost vestigial, used mainly for deliveries and emergencies. Children would grow up never learning to walk long distances because they'd never need to. The idea of walking several blocks would seem as strange as walking several miles seemed to them. Some visionaries proposed multi-level systems with slower local sidewalks on the ground level and faster express lanes elevated above the streets. You could travel from one end of a city to another without ever stopping, simply transferring from one moving sidewalk to another like we might change trains or buses. The wealthiest areas might have private sidewalks running directly to individual homes, eliminating the need to walk at all. Electricity required wires, and wires were expensive, unsightly, and limiting. But some Victorian scientists were experimenting with transmitting electrical power through the air, and this sparked grand predictions about a wireless future. By 2026, futurists believed, power would be transmitted through the atmosphere itself, perhaps using invisible waves or some property of electricity that hadn't been fully understood yet. Giant towers would broadcast energy across vast distances, and devices would simply draw power from the air around them, the way you might breathe air itself. No wires, no batteries, no need to connect anything to anything else. The implications seemed revolutionary. Your personal flying machine would never need refueling. It would simply absorb power from the atmosphere as it flew. The electric servants in your home would operate continuously without any visible power source. Trains wouldn't need to carry coal or connect to overhead wires. They'd pull energy directly from the air as they traveled. Some predictions went even further. They imagined that this wireless power would make portable devices practical for the first time. You could carry a telephone anywhere, staying in constant contact with anyone else. Lighting could be truly portable, not requiring oil lamps or candles or any connection to wires. Every device, every machine would be untethered and free. They also believed this would solve energy distribution problems. Remote areas wouldn't need expensive infrastructure. A single tower could serve an entire region. Developing areas could leap forward instantly, accessing the same power as the most advanced cities without building thousands of miles of wire. Energy would become like air or sunlight, so abundant and freely available that it would barely be worth thinking about. The idea of paying for electricity would seem as absurd as paying for the air you breathe. All these technological changes pointed toward one inevitable conclusion in the minds of Victorian futurists. Humanity would unite into a single global society. National boundaries would become meaningless when you could travel anywhere in hours, communicate instantly with anyone, and share thoughts directly through mind-reading machines. By 2026, they predicted, a world government would oversee the affairs of the entire planet. This wouldn't be the result of conquest, but of natural evolution. As transportation and communication improved, as cultures blended and merged, maintaining separate nations would simply stop making sense. People would realize they had more in common with each other than they had differences. Conflicts over borders and resources would be resolved by rational planning at the global level. This world government would be enlightened and democratic, naturally. Representatives from every region would contribute to decisions, but those decisions would be made based on science and reason rather than politics and tradition. War would be impossible because there would be no separate nations to fight each other. The massive resources currently wasted on militaries would be redirected toward improving life for everyone. Language would be unified as well. Not through the dominance of English or any existing language, but through the creation of a new artificial language designed to be perfectly logical and easy to learn. Children around the world would learn this universal language alongside their native tongues, and within a generation or two, the universal language would become primary. Misunderstandings caused by translation would disappear. Literature and science would be instantly accessible to everyone, regardless of where they were born. They imagined that this united humanity would accomplish things that seemed impossible to divided nations. Massive engineering projects spanning continents, scientific research coordinated across the globe, the exploration of space, because surely by 2026, humanity would be turning its attention beyond Earth itself. Standing in 1890, looking forward to 2026, they saw not just technological progress, but the culmination of human civilization itself, the moment when humanity finally lived up to its potential and became a truly unified species, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. They believed the year 2026 would represent not just a different time, but a fundamentally different kind of world, one that would make the struggles and divisions of the 19th century seem like a barely remembered dream.